So, I've been dealing with a personal situation in my head for the last year and a half. And unfortunately, it's one of my own fucking making for the most part. Like, at best, 10% of it is on someone else, and let's be real here, to expect them to grow in the same way I would grow is unreasonable. They're just trying to go out there and live their life and have good times. I'm busy here contemplating the scale of the entire Earth and wondering, okay, what the fuck is going on? Which sounds bigger and better, but the reality is, I'm not bigger and better. I'm just a person looking at a problem and going, what the fuck is going on here? A difference in scale does not immediately put yourself above someone else. And I'm tired of it being played like that, because on some level, you could say and justify using the excuse of power dynamics relative to size and or skill. Yeah, you could use that as an excuse, but I don't want to use it as an excuse. I want to actually treat people as people, which is really hard to do when people are so infuriating. No, what the fuck am I going on about? Well, long story short, I ran into two YouTube videos today that just yeah, that connects really well to the core of what I've been trying to navigate around, both personally and externally. Because I am a naive dumbass. I think I go thinking, oh, if I can get everyone on the same page, we'll all be okay. When reality is, no, that's absurd and borderline impossible to get everyone on the same page, because if you're doing that, then you're destroying an entire ecosystem of information and dynamics that ultimately is part of the final situation. We're not just talking physical ecosystems and everything else. It's actual. Oh, let's see. It's conceptual ecosystems, because you can form attachments to concepts since you yourself are a concept. However, that doesn't mean that such attachments will always serve you well if that concept lies outside of reality. Yeah.
I'm going to say something that most of my audience is going to hate. Okay, here we go. Sometimes people pleasers can be the worst listeners.
Yeah, they can be the worst listeners. And in trying to sort through my own personal situation and the after effects of it, this video is pretty much sitting right next to the core of
I
things.
know I'm not happy about it either, but it's true. And we need to talk about it. And please don't hear this as criticism. This is simply constructive feedback coming from someone who has a degree in giving with no boundaries. But that's the problem. When we see ourselves as the martyr, we don't leave a lot of room for other people's perspectives, do
Nope, you really don't.
we? Because I'm usually pretty good at listening and empathizing and validating with someone, unless they bring up a complaint against me. Then I think to myself, well, that's interesting. I mean, after everything I do for them, they're really going to complain about that? Don't they know how much I sweep under the rug for them? Don't they know how often I bite my tongue and don't say something when I could? Don't they know how much grace I give them? But that's the problem. It's not grace if we're just waiting for a moment to rub it in their face.
Yep. Kindness and grace don't exist if you're planning on keeping score and holding the tally above their head like it's a debt. And that is the one thing I'm struggling with the most in this situation. Because I got attached to someone really deeply when I already kind of knew, ah shit, this person's in no place to be in a relationship, no place to navigate this situation and no place to even like try to bring it up in casual conversation. So my naive ass was like, okay, so then I just keep this to myself and try to play pretend and just being a solid friend and not getting excited. Ooh, that was the biggest mistake of my life. Second biggest mistake of my life. First one was crossing the apathy line because thought I could function on pure apathy. Oh, cognitive brain, how naive you are. Ugh. I want to be able to draw this line personally so that way other people have it as a reference point rather than just so that way I can get pity points or otherwise. Because no, I don't want pity. I don't even want respect. I just want to have this done and over with. I'm tired of how much it's been eating at my brain. Is Flicker okay? Flicker is not okay. So, how much of my own personal story do I include in this as necessary pre-context without letting the ego get involved, such that it starts replaying entire fucking memories loud in my head, and then I end up reprocessing things that ultimately other people aren't willing to sit through. Because that's challenge number one in this situation, is learning how to summarize without leaving out key details and reference points that ultimately did end up influencing what happened. It's it's like a new level nightmare, and I'm just dumbfounded at how I got myself here. I'm not surprised that I got myself here. Listen, the world prioritized information so much we left our emotional maturity behind in the dust only to realize, oh wait, we might actually need that. And now the entirety of society across the world is trying to repair their lack of knowledge on emotional navigation with inside of themselves and interpersonally between themselves and others, let alone systems and other concepts and it's already bad enough if you've got like one or two issues of your own and you're still fit within the system. The When you have ADHD, autism, you're a trans girl, you're non-binary, you've got anxiety, and you're too ambitious for your own good, yeah, no, that kind of leads to a pattern of self-destruction. Because when I was little, I thought people in school fucking hated me. And this wasn't in the sense of, oh wow, I'm a horrible person or anything else. No, I thought they were conspiring against me. And this is after I moved from one school to another around second grade. Because if we really want to go back to the first point of it all, it's the first choice I really ever made was I don't know how to connect with people. Back before, like, back around first grade, if not before then. I don't know how to communicate with people, feel connected or attached to people, with people. So I'm gonna just run around real fast, get things done quickly, be fastest one out there to make myself look interesting. You naive child. You naive autistic child. You were thinking in absolutes when really you just had to fucking throw your hands up and be like, alright, the fuck is this? Oh. So yeah, that's the thing. I also looked up to a tomboy of a girl in one of my earlier classes before I switched schools. Honestly, they look a lot like Alyssa in that regard. Probably more blonde-sided, but whatever. I saw they were taller than me, and it's like, I want to be taller, that tall. And then I got that tall, and it's like, Well, shit, this is inconvenient. Because I had a growth spurt in puberty, and now I'm just like practically 6 foot. And that's neither here nor there. Because of my inability to feel like I've formed meaningful connections with others in grade school and early in my life, I've got a bit of issues. And that's just gently ignoring all the other ways in which my autism and other issues also multiplied on top of that. I don't have the worst nightmare out there. I don't have the best nightmare out there. I just have another nightmare that I'm dealing with. It's not better than anyone else's nightmare. It's not worse than anyone else's nightmare. It's just relative. So, my naive, non binary dumbass did not know a single thing about being trans up until they hit college, and even then, we were playing with the idea of it without actually having the word for it before we even hit college. Junior high school to high school. I mean, that's skipping ahead a bit. Because second grade, moved schools, there are some important life lessons I learned. One, no one cares if you're telling the truth. They care about whether or not you can quietly and respectfully accept it responsibility for something so as to show that you are mature. When in reality, that's not always maturity. Sometimes that's just psychopathy functioning as a facade of maturity, wherein you accept the consequences of a situation regardless of if you were actually to blame for that situation or not, and in remaining quiet, polite, and civil, you get trusted more by the adults around you. Yeah, that was not a fun lesson to learn, but it's functionally useful. Uh, then there's how my brain got. Then there's how I got kind of hooked and or infected by pickup culture while I was still in grade school because I ended up with a crush and I didn't have any confidence in myself because subconsciously I'd concluded myself a freak and or social outcast due to the media I watched at that age and seeing the parallels in my existence relative to others when no, it wasn't actually the case that I was a freak or a social outcast. My social needs and dynamic interactions were just different relative to most people within my local environment. Most kids would move on with the group and get bored of something by the time I started having fun with it. So it's just autism getting in the way in a sense. And let's not even begin talking about how fucking it autism on top of my innate like core personality, INFP, multiplied into INTP as the defense mechanism. Hmm. Really, I don't know what I was like as a child to the full degree where I can say I had any singular personality type, but I can definitely say, ooh, defense mechanism go burr in INTP to the point where I had no idea of what feelings were. I had no awareness of my own feelings. Well, I did, but I didn't. I had awareness of them, but I didn't treat them as anything like worth listening to because I didn't have the cross-reference book that everyone eventually builds in socializing with one another back in grade school. By playing around with interactions and learning interesting dynamics, people learn early on how to socialize based on their environment. And that creates a guidebook that helps them navigate throughout the rest of life. Except my dumbass, because of how much I was too logical and literal focused back then, never felt comfortable winging it. So I was stuck in observation and learning mode for like what, 15, 16, 18 years of my whole life. Yeah, no, that does something to a person, I'm going to say. Uh, it kind of fucks a person up, really. I'm glad I grew out of the. I'm glad I didn't keep a lot of my younger habits of banging my head against the wall when I was frustrated or felt like I'd failed. Uh, I'm glad I've learned to understand jokes, even if I don't always flow with them. Hmm. But yeah, no, pickup artist territory. Had a girl that I liked, wasn't really confident around, and because of the projected media portrayal of male dynamics being boys don't admit they have feelings, and me trying to play to the role to the nth degree because I didn't know being trans was a thing. Thank you, suppression, for that. I really, really. Let's not get into my bitterness and negativity. Gently push that aside. Yeah, I got hooked by pickup territory, and or gently touched upon a website around that territory back when I was still in grade school before I had even left 6th grade. Not going to do good things to the brain. Also, I think I hit a good portion of puberty, like, before I even got into junior high school, on some level. It's weird. It's all just so fucking eldritch and weird relative to other people's experiences. It's not better than other people's experiences or lesser than. It's just weird. It's like you get this normal person's experience that's just a straight horizontal line. And then I've ended up skewed to a vertical position. And it's just like, how the fuck did this happen? I'm not proud to admit, but yeah, no, my brain got hooked on the idea of mind control and hypnosis exactly because of unresolved feelings for my first crush, all the way back in grade school. But it was hooked on the fantasy of it, not the reality. It's interesting how the fantasy of it was one thing, but I eventually grew out of that into realizing, oh hey, if I could do anything I want, what would be the point? What would be the fun of it? It wouldn't, if I could do anything I wanted all the time, it wouldn't really feel like it's worth doing now, would it? So I gave up on that. Disconnected from the internet relative to my peers, didn't have a lot of the same things. Yeah, no, in many ways I was socially isolated by circumstance and or my own bad habits and issues getting in the way of me understanding and navigating around reality. Ah. Now, is me putting all this information out on the internet blindly and so clearly really a good idea on my part? No, but frankly speaking, I don't give a shit. Let's be real here. I am not walking a sane path forward. I'm also not your friend, by the way. I'm just someone who manages to entertain. If my concepts and or thoughts help you, great. Just don't sanctify me, please. If you do that, I'm going to be kind of frustrated, really. And if you throw me in the gutter and try to call me worthless, I'm also going to be frustrated because that's just like the negative mirror version of sanctification or putting things up on a pedestal or putting things below a pedestal, basically. Oh, so yeah, no, I'm a weird, eldritch freak of a person. But that doesn't mean I'm not a person. It just means I've got different dynamics at play within myself. I'm not special. I'm not standing at, I'm not above someone else's position. I'm just standing in a different territory relative to it. Hmm. But no, thanks to my mom's efforts and otherwise to, try and get me help and have me grow and learn and everything. She eventually sparked forth enough resources and perspective to make me realize around like fourth grade or something on the way to one of my classes from like some other class to art class that like, wait, people don't hate me and conspire against me to isolate me. That's my own perception. They just don't give a shit and don't know how to connect with me. Fuck! Oh yeah, and then back in grade school, I was technically the one to try and live up to adults' expectations by trying to get good grades and doing my best in my classes despite my ADHD. I started hitting my limit around sixth grade when it came to English and writing, so that was an interesting experience. Only to then end up at even under medication that was supposed to help me, I was still having difficulties. So at some point, my brain saw all of everything, even my mom's attempts to help me grow as a person relative to what was understood at the time, and made the metaphor and analogy of, oh, I'm just living like a lab rat that's trying to perform well in tests and help the scientists get their good observations through. And realized I was doing it to the point where later on I would be practically risking my life and my health for that. And some part of me spoke up then and was like, no, I don't want to live that life. I don't want to live a life where I'm just some adult's specimen to be recorded and issued notes and reactions on. I want to be my own person. I want to actually understand things for myself. And so I just kind of gave up on trusting the system and trusting adults and everything around me. I started really observing. Hell, started really observing around fourth grade when I had that other realization. Because I was still attached to my crush, even if later on I was just like, yeah, there's no reasonable way I'm going to get with that girl, so after everything that's happened, so just leave them be. It's weird. I'm this confusing mix of red and green flags wherein I can get unhealthily attached to people. But then I can also logic my way out of actually having any attachment to them because I realize, oh, they're dealing with their own life, their own situation, and I'm not bringing anything all that great to the table. I'm still acknowledging the responsibility I have relative to that situation. And that didn't start out that way when I was younger, but I did still hold on to my heart somehow. It was weird. For a long time, my freaky kinky side was hooked and still is somewhat hooked on the fantasy of hypnosis and mind control relative to others, but let's be real about that. It's not where my heart sits. It's just where my insecurity sits. And thus, my insecurity can get caught by the fantasy of that. But my heart still belongs with me in respecting others and making sure that the original personality isn't lost, that people aren't just turned into toys where, yeah, it's a confusing dynamic. Also, I hated myself for that having an interest in that stuff because I did care about people. So that was an internal mental struggle and fight for like most of my maturing teenage and Childhood years. Constantly dealing psychic damage to yourself because of one of your own interests conflicting with the values you hold in your heart.
Yep, 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 yep.
Thankfully, I've grown into a healthier idea of it, and I've learned how to I've learned how to filter for people that can actually handle and are compatible with me in relationships instead of daydreaming of people who would never understand me and would never choose to understand me unless by casual circumstance. And it's made my life better. It's definitely isolated me, but it's kept me from wasting my energy in so many different ways. Mm. Oh yeah, I'm also a gremlin that ended up attached to other gremlins and or really interesting people, attention flowers as some might call them, and wanted to, you know, be able to treasure time with them. And so, despite my nature leaning in the exact opposite direction, I actually chose to consistently and repeatedly try to become branch into the territory that those kind of people liked. And I've grown into it such that, well, it's actually a part of me now. It's really interesting how that all works, how you can gain a genuine, real fragment of something else and surpass the non existence of it in yourself through repeatedly trying to learn about and understand it. You can carve its structure, its form, its reality, even if it's just a grain of sand relative to its reality. You can still obtain that through your experiences and relative inquiries about it. It's the whole reason why we're stuck with like any masculine energy at all on us, because I'm not leaving behind even a ghost of my former self. If they're still around and they're still able to contribute, then I'm going to be there for them. Yeah, I'm not very proud of myself during junior high school because I was still very much stuck in the same shit, different day. I was going in my rebellious age era around that time where I started using a DSI to connect to the internet because there was no other way to connect to the internet and free Wi-Fi was the only thing I had available. I definitely looked at a few things I shouldn't have, but all things considered, it's not as bad as what some other people out there have gotten scarred with. Ugh. Then around junior high, then from junior high school into high school, because towards the end of junior high school, I was starting to hit my limitations on my natural fluency with math, and I couldn't really coast with it as much as I used to. So there was that. I also changed from one school district to another again around in the transition from junior high school to high school. So I had a new opportunity to really, I had yet again another opportunity to like reinvent and reimagine myself. And I think the most I ever did with it was just chill and hang out with people that I thought I could hang out with, that I figured I could connect with. Oh, there was this one friend that was telling me some fictional story that I got hooked on, wherein every night they would have needles injected into their brain and go into another dimension. And my naive ass thought they were being real. So yeah, no, consistent experiences like that slowly helped me realize, ah, I would believe in fantasy even if it would disconnect me from reality. That's not good. Eventually, I even came to the conclusion that Santa doesn't exist, but hey, each person deals with things at their own pace. Holds on to safety blankets and comfort concepts for as long as they can in what ways they choose to. Even if it sometimes brings detriment to them. It's really interesting how people work like that. How even as a person myself, I work like that, even if I try to fight against it, because I know I want to grow and understand others well enough to navigate around them and connect with them without, ignoring the foundation of who they are and how it's been built upon over time. Sixth grade, junior high school, horny, internet. Oh yeah, in high school I was given a school laptop. My naive ass thought, okay, I'm just gonna do it. My ADHD naive ass was like, I want to play Minecraft on this. And so I installed Minecraft on it. And so I also used it to connect to the internet. Up until I got the damn thing, uh, up until I accidentally infected the damn thing with ransomware while I was looking for mischief online, mischief material online, and whoop-de-fucking-do. I tried to get all the Minecraft files off of it after they'd gotten the ransomware off of it before I handed the laptop back, but reality, in an attempt to try and escape from the consequences of my action and make sure or I wouldn't get in trouble, reality is, didn't succeed at that, and I'm glad I didn't. Ooh, there is that time where I stole back a laser pointer that I had confiscated from me back in like grade school, in my gymnastics and or other class. I stole it back and then acknowledged I had taken it back. I got in trouble for that, but hey, better to get in trouble and accept that you can't get away with things than to think you can get away with things and not get in trouble. I don't know what to say. I don't really understand why other people want to buy into their own ego so much that they can ignore the consequences of their actions, but then again, that's me not being in the same place as they are within the territory. I'm not better, I'm just at a different location. Some people value certain locations more highly than other locations, and thus they think it's better, but that's not necessarily the case every time. It's all just kind of relative. Also started trying to draw and have an internet presence connected to DeviantArt when I was in junior high school. Well, not junior high school, halfway through high school. So I think that's when I really started growing and stopped being solely observing others and learning from them. Because I only really started observing others and learning from them properly back when I had that recognition of, oh, people don't actually hate me or aren't trying to conspire against me to isolate me socially. They just don't know how to interact with me and are indifferent to me. Huh. So this pain from being an outcast and sitting in the void of disconnection from people around you isn't something that I can pettily and selfishly justify in a negative light to take out on others. Okay. Hmm. Because again, it's not grace or kindness if you do something for someone and then rub it in their face afterwards.
It's not grace if we think because of our giving, they owe us.
Yeah, a gift is not a debt. For someone to reciprocate a gift with their gift of their own in return shows that they care about you in on a mutual level to the same degree. For someone to just accept a gift and then give nothing back shows that they don't care about you. It's very clear communication. And people have become so prioritized in the idea of, oh, hey, I helped you, so now you help me. And it's just like, that's how social contracts should work, but because we live in a system that's taken advantage of that and abused it to no end, no one wants to really actually understand the basic foundations behind that anymore. And so we're all just kind of living in our own bubbles relative to each other, thinking that we are deserving of things, but not realizing that being deserving of something doesn't mean you're owed that thing by any one specific person. You want to have a written and signed contract where you actually have your relationships signed out in legal paper documentation where it says they have to. You go do that. I'm gonna just go try to find the people that actually care about me. Also, in recovering from this whole situation, which I haven't even gotten to yet in the relative timeline, because holy fuck, the details are scrambled everywhere and they relate in different ways at different times, and I'm just trying to get it all together. But yeah, after that situation, I was just kind of stuck sitting with myself and my issues, wishing that I had someone to help me, but ultimately, kind of getting left in the dust and the dirt. And my own panicking and my own issues. It it wasn't fun. It wasn't exactly kind to get left by that, but it was the result of my own actions and how I made sure that someone else's safety was prioritized over my own. I had failed to account for how my own mistakes would multiply with my own choice driven actions to make sure that someone else's safety would be assured before my own in the worst case scenario, and thus wasn't ready for the impact of it. So I don't regret the choices I made, I just regret that I didn't factor in the mistakes relative to the situation. For all the times I slipped up and otherwise. But that's a tangent of ADHD connecting to a network of information and jumping from point to point rather than sticking to one specific territory, because ADHD is like having wanderlust for information and interactions between territories rather than calling any one territory specifically home unless it's a hyper fixation and or interest. Meanwhile, other people usually stick within a territory and only ever jump from one territory to another if they're on the outer edge of one territory and it overlaps with another. If someone else brings up something that isn't like a major jump, but more like a small step from one territory to another, they're fine with it. But that's not what I'm wanting to get on about. I got to the conclusion that jokes can find with the previous conclusion about how contrast plays into jokes and the unexpected, which I got from watching someone else's video, by the way. I'll probably throw that in the description. Uh, I realized, oh hey, people play with the basic social interaction rules and make a game out of it. And for some people who don't play by that game, getting told one thing and then having it be revealed that it's another thing at the end, like having something negative happen only to then be revealed, not really. They can't handle that because they're not wanting to play on that scale. Meanwhile, other people go so far above and beyond to it to where it's like, damn, you fucked up. I can laugh at the twistedness of it, but holy damn, you're fucked up. bitter, dark humor can be an example of that. Because it's about sticking to a pattern for a certain length of time in the negative, and then ending it with a positive to show that you still care. At different scales, the humor just becomes darker, darker, and darker. But some people can't deal with that because they don't want to step into those scales, and as such, they can end up hurt by darker jokes of a different scale because they treat some of the information and details of playing at that scale as sacred and thus aren't willing to subvert them. It's like a prank. At some point, pranks become mean. And so some people are okay with that and some aren't. Personally speaking, I want to pull off non-mean pranks, but I'm gonna be real, my aptitude for pulling off pranks is horrible. I can't think of decent prank to save my fucking life. I mean, technically in this situation, I tricked someone into being there for themselves when society had programmed them to not be there for themselves, but that's my perspective relative to what I understood of the situation that may not be the full reality and scope of the situation. Because in many ways, the other person was standing up for themselves on a polite level. What I needed was an impolite level of standing up, a level where they could stand up for themselves on an impolite and rude emotional area so as to cut through the noise of my own insecurities, overthinking, and have it be heard properly. Which is an interesting social dynamic in and of itself, but that's not the point. So from high school into college, I learned about transness, started trying to do creative projects, finally got a laptop of my own that could, and then an art program. And then around pandemic time, I finally got a laptop that was 64-bit, so I jumped into VR chat, or at least somewhere around that time. It was really only after I turned 18 and after I jumped into VR chat that I really started exploring more intimate relationships with others, because otherwise it was basically casual. And the only place I had really played around in and had interesting interactions in was with my childhood friend over at their house, interacting with the plushes and Legos and all that other stuff, and holy fuck, that went into some silly territories. Some fucked up territories because we were kids too, and we didn't realize the difference between darker areas and brighter areas. They all just looked the same to us. But yeah. Did you know that in the fictional world revolving around a plush named Admirable, I would kill that fucker and just to revive them again and laugh? Yeah, in some regards, the friend wanted to have a day by day normal life living roleplay with those slashes, but I didn't know how to do that. I was so disconnected from the possibilities of that because I was unlearning all of the misconceptions and issues within my own perception on that structure in and of itself. So instead, things got absurd, weird, and a little bit wild, but then it got shut down, and then got into story and lore building. Uh, it was interesting, because in one regard, I basically played God with those plushes, but also still showed that I cared. Yeah, no, it was kind of fucked up, but it was also kind of okay. I had that experience at that time in that way, where it wasn't actually hurting any real people. And honestly, I'm glad for it. Now, the definition of a real person is something that I'm not even going to get into the tangent and rabbit hole of, because holy fuck. And there are so many other things unresolved left with that friend that ultimately I'm no longer in touch with them because we drifted away. I kind of got bored of playing God with the plushes, and in bad timing, I think I helped their mom shut them down on their childishness and force them and to encourage that they ground themselves to reality more. And I wish I hadn't done that because I really do think it hurt them. In one way, it made sense and was a good decision on a rational, logical, the reality of things is this function. But it didn't account for the emotional attachment and where the other person was at within that space at that time. It didn't try to help them grow out of it. It didn't try to understand. It just stated a blunt fact and forced it upon that fact upon them. And I'm still working on resolving that issue in and of myself because sometimes I get so focused on facts and details that ultimately I forget to acknowledge and navigate around the emotional. And that can hurt people. That can hurt people in ways that sit with them. I don't like that. I don't want to hurt people. I want to have fun. I want to play around and hang out and everything, but I don't want to hurt people in ways they don't like, in ways that they don't find fun, in ways they can't just laugh and brush off. And ultimately, I'm still working on that skill. It has a lot to do with maturity and self-growth. Being able to connect with others, hang out with them, enjoy their company and presence without forcing them to grow into the same territory that you're standing in, without dismissing them or otherwise. I'm fucked up, but I'm not so fucked up as to not care about others, or to think that not caring about others is a good thing. It definitely has its place in navigating and having boundaries. But to abandon your heart is to miss out on a lot of the life lessons that are kind of essential for having a happy life. So yeah, I was there at VR chat wandering around, ran into that mouse, and a mouse that at some point called themselves Hope, and Volt Boy, who I'm still friends with. I've still got a list of all the nicknames I've given to people and or titles I've basically organized people around. And in that way, it's kind of like a way to acknowledge that I still care about them even if they're no longer part of my life. For all the logic prioritization in my head to navigate different territories, I really am at my core a sentimental bitch. Hmm. I would imagine that some people on the other side of the apathy line, sitting amongst all the bile and surviving it because they've let their integrity degrade, I imagine they still like that under the surface. Caring about others and wanting to be sentimental, but knowing that they can't cross back over the line unless they want to deal with all the things they're just scared of, and that may incur psychological pain as the toll for making that mistake. So I can understand why some people choose to stay on the other side of the apathy line, but I also think it's doing them more harm than good to hold on to their pride like that. To think that just because they can feel proud of themselves that the other issues are all resolved as if it's nothing. I look at that and see someone trapped in their own small world, disconnected from others, and I'm like, that's gotta hurt. That's gotta hurt. Being isolated like that. Yeah, I met a mouse called Hope. They talked about their dreams and everything, and it was really fucking cool. Unfortunately, I got hyper focused on their dreams instead of. In some regards, I got hyper focused on their dreams, but I also wanted to still share. Oh, that I cared about them as a person, so it was an interesting mix of healthy and unhealthy, like usual. Then there was Volt Boy, who was, I think, autistic to some degree, and or had trauma that made him look autistic relative to his issues and everything, and I'm still in contact with that one. Moon Girl, still a friend. I just suck at staying in contact with people. It's not that I don't care, it's just that I fail to maintain my social bridges and they structurally degrade over time. Hell, even if you don't have a friendship decay, your bridge can still structurally degrade in your connection with someone exactly because you're disconnected from where that person is at in their life and what's changed with them. If you expect them to stay the same all the time, then ultimately you're letting your bridge degrade and erode out of neglect of it being part of the present moment. It's like a bridge is taking void damage. But yeah, after all of that, running into a trio that I still care about even if they fucking hate me. Because that's where I think my first big mess was around, is just me wanting to maintain a presentation at all costs, regardless of my mental health. Not realizing that eventually, in doing so, that cost would be put on not just myself, but them too, when my integrity eroded in the bile. I stepped across that line briefly. I'd never want to do that again. And never want to stay there, because if I do, I'm not going to be able to live with myself. I'd never be able to live with myself if I just stayed in the bile and became the worst version of who I could be. If I became someone that didn't care about others without acknowledging the reality of things and how you can't try to give people what they want as a form of care, because sometimes in doing so, you end up enabling their bad qualities as opposed to actually helping them grow. Uh, then I ran into my midnight, and then former event organizer through my midnight, I think. then chaos through my midnight, then sea dragon, which led to the dense stork, who I got to attach to because my attachment and or possible connection fantasy around the event or former event organizer was cut short when I realized, oh wait, they're not actually emotionally mature. They just act mature because they focus on solely the logical and the facts. They don't actually have emotional maturity. And in all the weight of that got transferred on top of what was newly forming, and eventually my cognitive load just buckled, and it was like, ah, shit. I am way too attached to this dork for my own good. I want to protect them from themselves. And that's not helping someone, that's enabling them. And that's really where the situation started. I fell in love with them as if I fell in love with my own insecurity and tried to keep it from taking the consequences of its choices. Like a knoll trying to keep Trace from doing something because Trace was blinded to the fantasy of things rather than realizing the reality of her impacts. And even with all that calling out, it took towards the end of that time connected for her to really grow and change. To realize that, oh, for as much as I care about this person, my actions are hurting them. I am intruding on their space and making them feel uncomfortable. In my eagerness to connect, I kept poking and poking and poking. And it left a bruise. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt you. And then Anol had to deal with their issues afterwards when he got abandoned, because that caused him to get all self-righteous, and Trace ended up having to be the one to hold him back and during that whole thing and keep his toxic self from being totally and utterly expressed. Because whether or not whether or not Noel likes to admit to it or not, they authentically fell in love with an idea of the dork that was closer to the reality of things. Which means they were putting in actual effort from a place of love and care and trying to keep people from getting hurt. So when they got abandoned and when their efforts got saw as something else, it felt like a slap in the face to all the intentions. Felt like a knife in the back, even though ultimately he, they could understand what happened. It was not being believed that kind of triggered an old core wound around that whole psychopathy lesson of, oh, if I just to go cold and take responsibility for something, even if I didn't actually do it, regardless of if I'm guilty or not, people will like and accept me. And I've still been struggling with how to reconcile that in a healthier way throughout ever since I got kind of dumped and abandoned by that group of goobers. The weight of the situation for them was not proportional to the same weight I was placing on top of myself that I was trying to handle all on my own. So the impacts of their choices had greater effects than they would have ever intended or even realized. I don't want to hold that against them because then they would just beat themselves up over things they didn't know, and that's not fair. That's not fair to who they are as people. That's not fair to what they understood of things the person most in the know about the situation, the most aware of everything that was going on, was ultimately me. To ask people to make choices that made sense from my perspective was ultimately a naive thing for me to do time and again when I wasn't sharing that perspective with the others. I was failing to communicate properly due to my own insecurities and fears, and it bit me on the ass. It bit me on the ass and caused an entire psychological breakdown. And ultimately, I think that relates the the second worst mistake of my life relates back to the first worst mistake of my life, exactly because that communication issue was also an unresolved problem back then, too. It's just that I made the mistake of crossing the apathy line, and I consider that the bigger life lesson from that one. And thus, I haven't repeated that mistake, but so I instead stumbled upon this second one that I had been unintentionally making in trying to get my needs met without communicating because I didn't feel like people were going to actually listen or care. And because of that, I would shut down relative to my environment, and I wasn't able to grab the words I wanted in order to communicate. In thinking that someone else would not care about me or wouldn't make the time to understand and care about me, I psychologically set myself up for failure because that put my headspace at an angle where the words and choices available to me were influenced by that conclusion rather than leaving the authentic feelings free to flow out. An unintentional filter on top of the reality of where I was at that got in the way of communication due to social awkwardness and a bit of social trauma. No, people like Trace, people like that dense dork, they don't like conflict because they think conflict is wholly bad or it represents something else that they don't want to deal with. They both want to be liked by other people, and yet in hyper focusing on it so much, they end up beholden to other people's expectations in a way that shuts them down and keeps them from being authentically themselves. It keeps them from acknowledging the reality of things and thus clinging to the intentions of their actions rather than owning up and maturing for them. And let's be real, that was where I was last at when I last understood and knew the dork, before the whole abandonment and disconnection. That is my understanding of that dense dork relative to that moment. If they've changed since that moment, awesome. But that's not for me to know or figure out on my own because I only get to know that if I'm a part of their life. And right now, I'm not a part of their life. No matter how much I care about them, it's better for me to stay disconnected like this. And I don't know if I'm telling myself that that is a partial truth and a partial lie, or if it's just the emotional conclusion I came to when I decided to try walking away the first time. It's the emotional conclusion I've returned to in trying to and choosing to walk away the second time when I realized if I keep holding on to my hopes of them defying my expectations, it's only going to hurt both of us. I keep on having my silent expectations around them without ever communicating or help letting them get to the point where they can listen to those expectations, then we're both only going to end up hurting each other. Because the ways that I navigate life and the ways they navigate life are like polar opposites. The difference between a thinking and a feeling. In a way, I'm kind of like a living version of it, an INFP's shadow. Shadow function. They rely on logic when things break down. And I got stuck in that relying on logic state because I was so terrified of the world as an autistic kid that when multiplied with it, the fear would just automatically shift me over to INTP. And so I've had to make my way all the way around the circle back to INFP and or its closest relative point, ENFP, I think. Let me go look at the details to see if I'm remembering that right. Okay, no, it is INFP. INTP, INFJ, ISFJ, INFP. Yeah, it's all of that. I've had to jump into the shadow function time and time again just to reconnect to my original emotional nature. It's always been thinly connected here, but it's never been something I could jump across easily or have any control on whether or not I'm choosing to jump. And I still don't have control over that. I have more options and ways of navigating between the two now that I've mapped out my system structure and how the different connections lay between the different parts of me for those of us who are allowed within the front space atrium. But that doesn't mean that this gap doesn't still exist. This line of paranoia is the connection between a null and trace, wherein a null has to logically think through things to some degree to keep trace's naive paranoia from having negative impacts on the world around her. So they chose to be brave, curious, and to try and become safe, even if they're still crude, rude, and brash around them. Even if they can't keep their hypercriticality in check all the time, a null ultimately does still care about Trace. And because I saw that dense dork as similar to Trace, he ultimately got attached to that dense dork in a similar way, in wanting to protect them from themselves. But that's not leaving someone to grow, that's setting them up for failure. Which is why Anil ultimately prioritized recovery and figuring things out once our self-trust broke along this line. He didn't have a choice on whether or not Trace was going to subvert him, whether or not Trace was going to do their own thing, and so he had to dismantle everything. Anil had to dismantle everything they knew before and rebuild it from the ground up in order to regain connection and control over connection and communication with this part of myself, who was naively trying to connect in the hopes of finding answers for her own issues by connecting with someone else who also had some of those same issues. But because Trace was lost in a fantasy of the connection, and Ira doesn't really care or know about the difference. She's mostly feeling. She's not the reality of things. She's connected to feelings of things, not the present reality. That's the reason why Anil and her have a connection here. Because this is the fucker who stays up front most of the time. This is the fucker that's our anchor to the reality of things. And we had gotten to a point where we thought our system structure could handle the stress of trying to just be a friend for someone we had such intense feelings for without communicating or otherwise. And that was our naive mistake. It was our naive mistake to think that we could avoid having the tough conversations with someone in order to better respect that they would never want to have those conversations with us. That they weren't in a place to handle things. Had I relied on the others more and asked for help beyond the bare minimum, maybe we would have had a better outcome. Maybe we wouldn't have resulted in the group splitting and people getting hurt. But the reality is that's not what's happened. The group did split. People saw each other's shadows and judged each other. And that left everyone a little bit hurt. As far as I know. That left everyone confused with why the other person would choose to do something. When we knew from the start, yeah, no, that dense dork is not emotionally mature at all. And I'm not much better. I'm not better than that dense dork. I've just made some progress sooner in the area of emotional maturity before they had even started on that. To compare my emotional maturity and ability to navigate things relative to their emotional maturity and ability to navigate things would be cruel and unreasonable. It's one of the reasons why I asked everyone to try and be there for them, that dense stork. Because I knew I could recover from this situation. I knew that I could bite the bullet and eat it if I had to. Or at least I thought I did. And then I got spiked into the abyss from being abandoned because of things I did not account for. And holy fuck, that was hell. But that was me trying my best to take on the responsibility of what I knew and understood in order to account for my own issues, for my own foolishness and insecurities, for all the different ways in which worrying about people, for as much as it shows that you care, can ultimately disconnect you from them. And so I was stuck to start again from where Knowles really started to begin with. And all of the issues that we had overcome were now problems again. It was like that from the beginning of the situation when this line between these two broke. It was only truly carved in when we got abandoned. And so I had to sit with myself and see the worst of myself and the best of my own intentions. The best of my own choices getting left in the dust because of the mistakes I had made. All the things I wanted to share just getting upended and dismissed because they were mixed in with everything else that I was still struggling to handle. And that's the thing. We are different from that dense stork in the fact that we operate around a null more than we do trace. That dense stork is mostly in this area, and so their perspective and understandings are based around that area for all we know and understand. If we're wrong about them, then joy, we're wrong about them. I'd rather someone prove me wrong than prove me right for only for it to being proven right to lead to a negative end. To lead to a self-destruction of two genuinely decent people who just tried their best in the ways they knew how. We were born within the cycle of generational trauma. It wasn't something that either of us chose. Which leaves me sitting here both wanting to try and help that dense stork work through things, but knowing that exactly because of the circumstances of the situation, I can't be the one to help them. I can't be the one to help them figure this shit out because I was part of the problem. And if they don't want me in their life, if they don't choose to have me in their life while also maintaining solid boundaries, regardless of how clear or murky they are, then I don't get to help. I don't get to be there or be a part of their life. No matter how much I want to, I just don't. Because that choice is on them. And until they feel safe and want to let me back in, I've just got to deal with where I'm at. That's the reality of this situation. That's the reason why it hurts so much. Because the reality is, I did not know how to ask for help from that dense stork in the ways I needed it at the time of the situation. And because of that, and because of my own damn pride, it got people that I care about hurt. That's gonna stick with me, even if some people don't want it to. So yeah, I'm a degenerate freak just like the rest. A dense stork of a different category, who, if only a few things were different, would be right there amongst others, advocating for a loss of people's rights and otherwise. I'm not anyone special. I'm just barely sitting at the edge of the line between okay and morally gray. And I want to stay in okay. I don't want to lose myself in the pile of. I don't want to lose my heart to the pile of morally gray. But yeah, in trying to navigate this whole situation and trying to fight and using my own feelings against themselves in order to give that dense dork space and make sure that my issues were restrained to their minimum impacts, I've learned a lot. Uh, and now I'm looking at the rest of reality and seeing other people dealing with their own situations, and I want to help. I want to be able to leave a lifeline and thread trailing behind that helps other people recover and grow, but the reality is, if I do that, then ultimately I'm putting an even greater drag on the system I live in, which still has to maintain its own structure and everything else. And that will ultimately kill the point of having the thread, so that's not an option. So instead, I want to focus on building tools and constructing information structures that allow for other people to recover and gain the energy to rejoin without having to demand special treatment, without getting to ignore their own issues. Because if I just make a thread, then all the greedy ones are going to swarm to it, all the desperate ones are going to swarm to it. And I can respect that, but the thread won't hold up under that weight, and even if it does, it's going to slow everything else up front down. So maybe it needs to slow things down a bit. Because if the entire system and structure of society focuses solely on progress, then we lose touch with the emotional reality of what that project progress entails and how to ethically handle it, resulting in the situations we've seen as of recent years. Blind ambition towards progress leads to entitlement and overgrown children who feel like they are owed things when they are very much not owed anything, and thus they ignore the value of the gifts that they have been given. So how does one create a structure that acknowledges things and still gives those gifts without enabling entitlement that would ultimately erode and destroy the structure? I know it's hard to see here, but feelings are a whole bunch of apathy surrounded in empathy. Meanwhile, empathy surrounded in apathy. It's and empathy is, on my version of this, black, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same shade, color, or dynamic as it is for other people. If there's one thing I'm glad I held on through to throughout all of the nightmare, it's that the other person deserves to be happy and live their own life, to be there for themselves and know that they can have their own back. when things get stressful, tough, and weird. I may have been naive and reckless in trying to teach them the same approach we use, so it may not be very functional for them, but that does not mean that the reference point can just be dismissed and tossed to the side. I hope they've gotten some useful fragments of information out of it. That help them figure out their own path forward towards someone they feel safe around, someone they're willing to fight for. Because from everything that's happened and what their actions have stated time and again, though they tried to be there for me, I don't want it to be in self-destruction, and so I shut that down. In a way, I kind of forced them to give up on fighting for me in the ways they knew how, because I wasn't okay with the cost it would incur on them. And unless they find out how to fight for others in different ways that don't incur that cost on them, blindly or recklessly, and then even if they want me back in their life, I'm not going to accept being back in theirs. If it would just lead to the same situation, cycle, and self-destruction as before. That's the reason why I'm willing to walk away, even if I don't want to. I'd rather that than total annihilation between two decent people who just tried their best. Myself and them. That's all I have to say on the situation. That's all I have to say on myself, and that's all I have to say on my goals. If you can't accept that, then okay, you don't know me. Hope all that nonsense just flies over your head and you don't collect any fragments then.